up on Dialogue Weekend. Japan plans to dump radioactive water into the ocean from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Is this the best solution for the contaminated water? It's been 5 years since China adopted the two-child policy, but the birth rate is dropping. Why and what happens next? And this week's newsmaker, now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to Dialogue Weekend. I'm CGTN. For nearly a decade after the Fukushima nuclear disaster, Japan has managed to keep the contaminated water stored in tanks. But that is to change soon, as Tokyo is working on details to release over 1 million tons of radioactive water into the sea. The decision naturally created uneasiness in neighboring countries like South Korea and could further devastate the fishing industry in Fukushima. So how should the countries in the region as well as the international community be concerned with the possible pollution of waters? For that discussion, we have in the studio Anna Tangen, independent current affairs commentator, and via Skype we have in Washington, D.C., we have Wu Changhua, executive director of the Professional Association for China's Environment. So welcome to the show, Changhua and Anna here. Of course, the key point here is like whether the water is safe or not. What we hear is the spokesperson, I think, from this Fukushima nuclear plant, the damage of the plant, the spokesperson said the concentration of carbon-14 harmful to human body, but an environmental group says, argued that, it is actually damaging human DNA. So Changhua, you're working in this field. What's your instinct tells you?
Well, I think this is a debate. I don't think there is a final absolute answer at this moment. At least there's no clarity, because on one side we have Greenpeace and other environmental NGOs basically stating about their concerns about the potential risk and about particularly on human health and the marine life. And fisheries actually industry in Japan have also expressed grave concerns about the consequences and the negative impacts on the industry itself. But on the other side, the International Atomic Energy Agency and the scientific community seem to be supporting the decision potentially by the Japanese government. So IAEA basically said earlier this year that the treated contaminated water discharged from the facility will comply with the international standard. And some scientists are saying that the water, when discharged into the sea, will dilute very quickly in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. So I don't think there is a clarity on the table yet for us to say there's absolutely safe solutions. I think debate is still needed, and the controversial is already emerging. That is why the Japanese government came out very recently to say, wait a second, we're not making a decision soon, we'll continue to re-examine it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for this information. Of course, IAEA is involved here. The two keywords, lack of clarity here, and also dilution. Say there's a vast sea, so probably the water, which is already treated, but still people have the concern. So whatever harm that may be, that will be diluted. As a private citizen, Anna, are you concerned with that, even with this dilution, possible dilution in the water?
Well, I don't think it's a debate. I think it's a science question. And I don't think going back between environmental groups and fishermen who perhaps one has, both have agendas. The concern by fishermen is that they would lose the ability to sell the fish that they fish in that waters because people would be concerned about it. And the environmental groups are pushing an agenda. But the fact is, by 2022, they will run out of space, and what do you do with this water? Mm-hmm. It's held right now in about 1,000 tanks. I do trust the IAEA. They do not have, a dog in this hunt. These waters like these are, in fact, released on a routine basis after being treated. So I think it's time to look at the technology, the science, and put aside all the kind of emotional pushing around that people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, go back to Changhua. Their fishing industry, the business community, of course, local residents in Fukushima, they are the group actually which opposed to the decision the strongest about the discharge of the waters. Understandably, on one hand, of course, their products, their exports, somehow will meet some difficulty, possibly, simply because of the name, it is from Fukushima. So, as you mentioned, there is lack of clarity. If the government provides enough clarity, and of course with the support from IAEA, is that enough for the local residents, for the local business to be, feeling relieved?
No, I don't think so. I think the biggest concern from the local fishery industry is the reputation, right? And with the meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear power plant back in 2011, it's already very damaging to the Japanese fishing industry already. So I don't. The short answer is no. But let me move back to the science, the reality side. I do agree with Agna. The science here, we need to figure out actually. One, the water is treated, so there is a process designed to filter the radioactive contaminants, reaching about to 62 of them. So I think they've been doing a relatively good job in terms of filtering, trying to dilute, trying to lower the concentration of the pollutants. But there's one particular radioactive isotope, which is called the tritium, that just cannot be separated because
seems we have lost the
isotope hydrogen.
Okay.
Meaning literally is a part. Yeah, no. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so basically it's part of the water molecules there. Yeah, so basically on one side there is no technology available today to separate tritium actually from the water so far. Secondly, because of the low concentration in the tank so far, so there's no solution. So I think that remains a major concern. In the meantime, I mentioned, even though they've been doing this processing, filtering, right, reducing the concentration, but it's not zero. Meaning it's not future-proof at this moment. So those are the concerns from the environmental industry as well as actually from the fishery industry there as well. So there are other options actually on the table which have been examined. We don't know the final decision yet. So one, basically saying, okay, if we're not going to discharge the water today, then we could probably expand the capacity and store the water on land or underground. Then two issues came up. One is the cost, because that's going to cost tremendously. Secondly, Japan, as we know, that region is very earthquake prone. Basically, risk continue to exist in terms of potential tank leaking if we continue to store them on land or underground. So those two factors take into consideration, and plus the IAEA actually being supportive in terms of reaching international standard. I think that's going to be very possible down the road in the future. Decisions will be made in terms of probably, the most sensible solution will be discharging. But I believe when that decision is made, that's going to trigger or cause more controversy or debate from the international community.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that H3, which is this tritium, it's very dilute in the tanks. Second, you'd have to ingest quite a bit of a quantity. You would have to actually drink it or put it somehow into your body in order for it to do it. It cannot radiate through your skin. It's a beta radiation. It can't go through your skin, so it's not, if it's in the water and it's diluted, there's already tritium in water. We are exposed to it. It's a byproduct of producing energy, not just atomic, any kind of energy. So I would say at this time it's probably okay, but the issue here is confidence building. They need to bring the environmentalists, the fishermen, South Korea, China, who are concerned, have their experts go there and to take a look, verify that this meets IAEA standards, and then I think with that confidence going forward, they can take the necessary steps, because something has to be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting, following that question, a political one probably, the Suga government is a new government which was established a few months ago. And why is the new Prime Minister deciding to tackle this issue now? It has been there for almost 10 years.
Well, they run out of storage space in 2022, so they have to come up with some sort of plan, and that's what he said. Now, they backed off. They're going to put it off for a few weeks as they kind of measure things, but hopefully they'll take a more inclusive approach to it. According to the IAEA, they are meeting the standards for discharge, so they should just make sure everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the concerns of Changhua, the neighboring countries, or countries in the Pacific Rim? It's understandable without this full clarity, people are concerned, the government is concerned. For example, South Korea is stepping up, or basically having a more robust testing of the goods from Japan. You think that's like a rational response to that?
I wouldn't say it's not rational. I think, this is sort of the mindset or concerns or lack of confidence, whatever the reasons out there, as well as reputational, is a reasonable concern because, South Korea and China are neighboring countries there. So if the water discharged into the ocean, no matter how low, the risk will be, that remains a reasonable concern. On the other side, actually, we do have an international multilateral platform. We have a UN Convention on Law of the Sea. So I'm hoping that somehow with the scientific support from IAEA and also with the international platform like UN, the issue will be lifted up to that level to have a really clear debate and discussion and hopefully build up a consensus so that we'll be working together.
Well, let's shift our attention closer to China. It's been nearly 5 years since the two-child policy came into force in China, but the country's fertility level is still low, and what is required to keep the population at its current size, lower than that. So the number of births in China stood at 14.6 million last year, the lowest since the founding of the People's Republic in 1949. This is taking place despite the introduction of supportive policies by the governments, including the extension of maternity leave and the tax reduction on children's education. So what could China do to slow down or arrest the trend of low birth rate so as to mitigate the pressure of an expanding aging population? Now, this is an issue, obviously, not only in China, but also in other countries, particularly developed countries. If you look at Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, probably similar issues here. What is a kind of like a unique situation? It's a much discussed fear here that is, China is getting old before it gets rich. Is that a reasonable question, Anna?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's two things. Traditionally, economics said that you cannot have expansion and growth unless you have growth in population because they use more goods and services. But right now, everybody's saying that in 5 years, 50% of the jobs as we know them will not be relevant. You'll be working somewhere else. In fact, there'll be an oversupply of labor. So one can be true, but they both can't be true. So at this juncture, I think actually China benefited from its one policy sacrifice. It wasn't a program. This was a sacrifice that was borne by everybody in China, whether from the top all the way down to the bottom. And it's not one of these things, in America people think that they forcefully take the child from you, giving birth. No, you can have another child. It's just that they are not entitled to benefits from society. So they're outside the system, and you're going to have to provide for them yourself. So, put aside all these kind of weird things that people are saying. China did this as a massive sacrifice. They're now looking at the markets, having so many elderly people as a proportion of the total population, and they're trying to balance that out. But the issue here is cost. Mm-hmm. Children cost a lot of money between school and the sacrifices people are making to do that. And there's also a lifestyle component. A lot of young middle-class people are saying one child is enough because two would really impinge on our ability, not only financially, but also to offer our one child kind of the benefits that we think that we want to confer on them.
Mm-hmm. Well, Changhua, what's your take when you look at the past 5 years since the introduction of the two-child policy? It's not exactly working as expected. What more China needs to do probably to achieve, say, the goal of having more children?
I think it's a tough question, right? If you look around the world outside China, childbearing is a right, is a decision, it's a choice, right? And by the family, by couples there. Of course, China has uniquely implemented this, for 36 years, we had this one child, one family policy. Now we're shifting into, you can have the second child. And so far, I think, as we all know, the outcome is rather mixed. Of course, on one side, we still started to have families having the second child. But somehow, generally, overall speaking, I don't think the design, the goal of or objective of the design of the policy has been failing in a way, it's not, at least short term at this moment, it does not help to address this sort of aging issues, addressing, shortage of labor issues, the government basically feeling this pressure or burden tremendously because of the pension elements, because of the health care. In the meantime, if you look at the numbers, the gap between taxpayers and the retirees, just the cost is just so huge. So the policy, whether it's successful or not, I think remains to be seen. At this moment, in this last 5 years, I don't think it is successful. There are changes, right, reforms unfolding now, but I don't think they are there yet. On one side, of course, as Anna said, it's a cost issue. Cost is not just financially, it's everything. It's a social cost, it's a time, energy, everything. Because China today does not have a well-established social security, social safety net yet, or strong enough actually to support, families to have a second child. So that part actually, I think that the government at national level, locally are still exploring. On the other side, though, and I'm an environmentalist, right? If you look at the contribution of China's One China, One Family policy, that has contributed tremendously in terms of, relaxing pressure on natural resources, in terms of reducing pollutions, and China has proudly stating its contribution by implementing the One Family planning policy, by avoiding 400 million people coming to life. In terms of, if you look at the potential, their carbon prints, their environmental prints. So I think somehow looking into the future, I am sort of torn between, on one side, if you put the population growth in the context of the ecosystem of the environmental pressures, I somehow still prefer, China continue somehow this sort of family planning policy. But, there are issues coming up which China does need to figure out how to address that. I don't think I have the solution, but at the end of the day, I think the policy will support. The government need to develop this policy safety net to support people actually to make that decision. So I cannot really foresee a future, say, and everyone will have the second and third child. I just cannot imagine what the scenario will unfold when you put the population growth in the context of global ecological redlining situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, Changhua, as a mother, what do you think about these supportive policies? For example, policies introduced in northeastern part of China, that is like extension of maternity leave from 30 days to 60 days, doubling the time, and also like the government, the central government from 2019 actually. So there's a tax relief program for the family to help the kids with their children, their education, basically, that will be deducted from your taxes over there, relieving the burden a little bit for the family. What more need the government might do to boost the family to support?
I think all the efforts at local level and national level helps. I think that's a part of the reform exploration process. But in order to get the really fundamental, a tipping point, a fundamental shift, it has to be the whole society, right? It has to be driven at the national level, the policy landscape, the social safety net, pensions, social security, support the child, upbringing, education, tax reduction. So rather than being just spotted, actually, here and there, they are trying out, that those experiments all will help actually tremendously to be really fastly mainstreamed, actually, in order to accelerate the shift if China wants to really achieve more successful sort of second child policy.
Mm-hmm. Well, now we are joined by Zhao Miao, partner at KPMG Legal Network firm and a mother of two. So welcome to the show, Madame Zhao here. Now you are a mother of two, so you have a second child, obviously benefit program since 5 years ago, basically. So tell us your experience of how challenging it is to have a second child. Is it possible to have a third child?
Well, definitely. Having children, especially for female, is going to be very challenging. I think it's more challenging than most of the male or fathers. So especially currently in metropolitans such as Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, for women the challenge is how to balance, or how actually there's never really a balance, how to actually sacrifice whether on the one side your career development, your career goal, versus kind of your family responsibilities. So it's a big pressure, can be very stressful, not only in terms of financial support, but also in terms of physical, challenge, as well as how to raise the kids in a healthy as well as a happy environment. So that's kind of my personal feeling. Although financially I do have a lot of support from the family as well as recognition on the emotional side, but I think generally speaking, there needs to be more support and improvement from the society if we actually want to encourage, or improve the birth rates.
But thinking is, beyond this supportive policy from the government, it's also like a behavior issue. Now young people, more and more young people living in the urban area, they're having a different lifestyle. For example, some would delay their marriage and then delay the age to have a child. Some would choose not to have a marriage or live alone there. So obviously that will affect this population growth over there.
Absolutely. I mean, over the last 10 years, China's down about, I believe, 44 million workers and births. So that's a real contraction that's going to continue as it goes forward. But lifestyle is the key. As you've heard from both my colleagues, it's really about this trade-off between being an individual, being a family, also the grandparents who say, oh yes, have another grandchild, how that goes. And what they have to do is figure out how they're going to balance all of these things. And I do agree. The government, if they want to do that, they're going to have to look at the hukou system so that people can get the benefits that they need to raise children in the areas that they're actually working, because that's not always the case.
Well, Zhao, you are nodding your head. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I mean, it seems that a lot of policies focusing directly on kind of, extended maternity leave kind of situation. I think, based on my experience and observation, it also has something to do with gender equality as well. Because, definitely women would be a very important part of the childbirth. So that women equality issue, I think it's also fundamental, other than just trying to find ways to compensate the kind of losses in terms of extending maternity leave or giving working moms more freedom in taking care of their children or during the, delivery. Generally, more profound reform, I think the lawmakers could look at would be, address the kind of gender inequality issue in China. Because generally, if you look at all the divorce proceedings and also how the cases are divided, although it is, I mean, superficially, it sounds like in China, female and male, we kind of, or, wife and husband, they are equal. And in reality, if you look at the result, it's not really. So I think that's the other aspect to actually really address or encourage or improve the situation about really low spirit of having a child or even more children.
There's still some room, obviously, to improve. Long way to go. Well, on that note, let's leave it there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. So, Coney Barrett, this is described as the quickest and the most controversial nomination and confirmation of the Supreme Court Justice. First of all, what had that to do with the upcoming general election?
Well, everything, because as Donald Trump said directly, he's counting on her to deliver the election for him. And
in what way?
Well, if there's any kind of disputes that's going up, especially about what ballots can be counted or should be counted, postmarking, things like that, he was thinking that it would go to the Supreme Court and that the Supreme Court would rule in his favor because he has 3 of the nominees and 3 of the other ones tend to, tend to agree with him. So at this point, I think it's actually not going to work that way. The Supreme Court has already ruled on a number of state court cases brought by Republicans and Democrats talking about what they can and can't do. Voting is not a federal issue. Mm-hmm. It's a federal result, but the states are the ones who control the voting. And in the past, the Supreme Court has been loath to override the states when that is in their constitution. There's nothing in it. Now, Amy Coney Barrett is an interesting character because she's what they call an originalist. This means strict construction. She thinks she knows from the wording of the Constitution, she believes that she can interpret it in today's terms with today's issues. And it's bound up in a lot of things. The Federalist Society is one of it. She's a big part of that. So it's going to be a very different world with her there. There could be court packing. It's possible that Joe Biden would add maybe 2 or more.
Well, after, of course, the election, if there's a Biden presidency.
I think we can pretty much look forward to that.
Sure about that. So, John Mill, you're a lawyer, you're a professional lawyer here. Barrett is 48, and she had been the judge for 3 years before she was nominated and, of course, confirmed as a justice. From a judge to justice, 3 years' time. Is that a normal track based on your understanding in your profession?
Okay. I wouldn't say it's not normal because it is not uncommon in the United States, Supreme Court history, for judges to have only like 2-3 years of Supreme Court justices to have only 2-3 years of judge experience. I believe there's even one who actually had no judge experience before he got nominated. So that's not the key issue. So I don't think it's unusual, to be honest. But definitely, currently, Donald Trump got the chance to really nominate 3 Supreme Court justices. That's kind of, to me, one of the biggest achievements in his very short 4 years of term. So like, for President Obama, he probably kind of nominated 2 out of an 8-year term. So, and also, all the 3 justices Donald Trump actually nominated, they're relatively young. I think Justice Barrett is only 48, and then before him, I think Kavanaugh, he's only 52 when he was nominated, and Gorsuch is also in his, I don't know, late 50s or early 60s. So that means, it's going to other than the immediate kind of impact on the current election, I think it's going to have a long-lasting, profound impact as to, the U.S. politics, as well as, the 3 branches, how they're going to interact with each other out of this constitutional kind of mechanism, set by the founding fathers.
Mm-hmm. Well, very briefly, Anna, if we have a Biden presidency, how he is going to balance the court?
Well, he can. There's nothing in the Constitution about how many justices should be on there. So if he can get the House and the Senate to say that go forward, he could do that. My guess is that in order to make it not look like court packing, he would only add 2. That would put basically 5-5 with Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, in the swing seat. Which would restore some non-politicization of these things, because this has been highly politicized.
Yeah, thank you. With that, we are coming to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Jianduo. Thank you for watching. See you next week.